Hey, Mike, how you doing? Welcome to another episode here of 401 Access Denied. So another fun topic for our audience to listen to today.
Yeah, very excited about this one.
Yeah, it's one that can be quite confusing. I think a lot of people they misinterpret it, they don't understand what it means and the emphasis. And we're going to try and simplify it today. We're going to try and make it easy, and we're going to try and make it fun as well, because I'd like to add a few bit of metaphors in as well to try and simplify things. And the topic today is the principle of least privilege. And what the hell does it mean?
Yeah.
What does people think about least privilege means? Okay, do I have to keep asking permission every time? It's like, every time I open the fridge door, do I have to ask, am I allowed to open that fridge door? And ultimately, that's really what, the principle of least privilege is really defining, but we can make it a little bit less, let's say, friction. We can make it more automated. And I think that's some of the key things here. So, I mean, from you, from the principle of least privilege, what's your experience or definition that you've heard in the past?
So for me, my personal sort of definition is making sure people have exactly what they need in order to do their job effectively and efficiently. Really, no more, no less. Less is definitely, I don't want security to be a blocker. I don't want people to not be able to do a thing and so if they need that access in order to be effective, then let's make sure they're trained and understand the implications of having that access. And then I feel comfortable. And then also you don't want people to have access to things that they just don't need access to. If there's no reason for you to have an account on the system, there's no reason for you to have an account on that system. And so it's really about minimizing, people's role, minimizing security or privileges to the person's role, their job function, and what they need to do to be effective. And I look at it really as an enabler more than as a blocker, right? I sort of start from a zero perspective. You have zero access and I'll give you everything you need in order to get you what you need, rather than taking things away.
Absolutely. And the way I see it as well is that least privilege, or the principle of least privilege, is really that kind of an enabler or the enforcer of things like, as you mentioned, zero trust.
Right.
Where people really start off with zero privileges. The first time you see something on the network, or the first time you get an authentication request, or the first time you're getting, somebody who's VPNing in or opening up an application, really what is it there? Is that person verified? Are they approved and authorized to do that? What authority do they have? And this really gets to zero trust magnet. I'm not a big fan of the term zero trust, because we always get into insecurity. We're sometimes known as, the negative, the no side. Right. We say no to everything. If it's a security risk, no. Can I connect my BYOD device? No. And I don't want to be confused with the no's. When we have to, and zero trust is another one of those negative perceptions that we get in the security industry. And we need to change, in this industry, we need to be more positive. We need to be able to be enablers of security, how to make it fun, how to make employees gain access without pain or without taking longer, without, getting access denied.
Right.
How do we enable authorized, approved access easy and simplified? And zero trust is a way of doing that, but I think many people see it as this continuous verification, and it will create friction in the current kind of approach. We definitely need to make it where I see it as it's about building trust. It's about enabling the access. It's about some adaptive security, where security becomes breathable. Security doesn't always have to be static.
Right.
It's a living organism. It's always moving. It's evolving. And that's what we have to get to, is that it focuses around the ease of use, it focuses around the positivity, and it focuses around employees getting the access they need on demand when they need it. And least privilege is a starting point, but you have to make sure that you enable and you look at the right, let's say, metrics or right security controls that satisfy the risk. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I really like Gartner's model, because Forrester kind of introduced zero trust, and really the principle of least privilege was evolved around that, because it really started off at a time when you had a lot of devices which were getting viruses. And then companies came up with network segmentation. So you would take that device, quarantine it off into another VLAN or part of the network where it didn't have access to anything, and it wouldn't get back on the network until that device had cleared up and the virus was gone and it was cleaned or restored and so forth. And that was really that kind of, and then of course we introduced things like the BYOD model, bringing the device. And this really kind of get into, well, where is the perimeter? The perimeter is disappearing in cloud digital transformation. and people are bringing in their devices, and should we allow them on the same network or not? So really, we get into the principle of least privilege. I always like to use metaphors into trying to explain it. And I did write a book called Least Privilege Cybersecurity for Dummies, not just for dummies. It's a book for smart people. The dummies format is that it's a quick read and simple to consume.
Right.
That's the purpose of it. But I used a lot of metaphors, and one of the metaphors, one that I use frequently is always about a bank. When you go into the bank vault, you get access to the big bank door. You open up the door, you go in, and you might have many deposit boxes in there that all have their own keys and all locked. And that's what basically the principle of least privilege is that I might have the ability to get through one door, but when I get through that door and I have multiple doors that unless I have the key to those specific deposit boxes, I can't access it.
Right.
So that's what I kind of look at the difference between, authentication and authorization. I have authentication, which gives me access to the bank from an identity, and it gets me through the door of the vault. But now I can't access the valuables until actually I do another verification that I should have access to that. And it's the same thing. You can take that bank vault and you can replicate that metaphor into, for example, a jewelry store. You get through the door of the jewelry store, and you have all of the kind of the valuables things. You might have some things that's less valuable or common that are out, and you can directly touch them. But the more valuable stuff is in these closed glasses, and more security is applied to them. So that again is taking that principle of least privilege, is that in order to get access to it, you have to ask, and the person has to give you permission. And of course, that could be automated.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things I think about least privilege a lot in terms of people, but the beauty of like DevSecOps and infrastructure as code is that it's becoming more and more easy to really apply it to the infrastructure within an to the actual code, the machines. What does this actual server have to talk to that server, and making sure the network connections are there, what ports, and really applying at that level. And I think it's the metaphor of the bank vault and the jewelry store ring true, in sort of conceptually and understanding it from a person perspective, but then also how do you then apply it beyond just people and to systems as well.
Absolutely. One of the things when I started off, kind of in this industry, I've been 25 years now, so a long time, from things like health service and ambulance service. But there was one company when I was working for in Australia, and it was called my role, job responsibility was called infrastructure tool specialist. And it meant that basically, fancy titles, fancy titles. So really what it meant is that anything that went in the data center, I was responsible for. So any tool, any hardware that went in the data center, I had to sign it off, make sure one was licensed, that, all the security things and configurations was hardened. And, a lot of the clients in the data center were, companies like banks, mineral companies, food, television networks, logistics companies. We're all having their own different cages within the data center. And I had domain rights. I had full AD domain rights that I could access every single one of those. Now, the physical security, you can get through the door and you get your big furry coat and your earmuffs. Yep. And you get into the cage. And I used to remember one thing I used to do was, open the CD tray so that I knew which server I was meant to be working on in the cage. And then it got really confusing because you may have two people working in that cage or three people at once, and you all went in at the same time, and everyone's looking as like you've got CD trays opened. So which one was the one I was meant to be working on? So, and then we got into the blinking lights.
Yeah, I was going to say, and when I went into the cage, it was always the blinking light, and I had somebody remote who was blinking the light of the machine I needed to take a look at or whatever with my furry coat. I also remember so the first time I went into the cage, it didn't occur to me right away, like, why were all of the machines were further away from the edge. It's like, so that people who don't have access to the cage can't just plug something in. It's like, oh, that makes sense.
You can't just put your arm through the cell. It's like jail cells and plug a USB in.
Yep.
So we got to the point where at the end we started playing our favorite songs. So the internal speakers and playing your.
Oh, nice.
So it was a lot of. Those were the days where you did what you did to get your job done. Right. And you made it fun as much as you possibly can. We had a lot of fun doing things like the blue screensaver.
Oh yeah,
was a lot of fun. We disconnected the mouse and the keyboard, So when people came in and they were doing the work and were like, oh, just the blue screensaver, nothing's working, like the keyboard's not working, the mouse is not working. And all it was the blue screensaver in the background. So it was a lot of fun those times. But one of the things I quickly realized that when I was working in those cages, that the physical security didn't really kind of, when you looked at it, I was basically going home, I had a laptop, VPN access, I remote directly in, just like I was doing, open the CD trays and playing the music. I had full access to everything.
Right.
And it really got me. That was a moment between my transition, because I was a network specialist, infrastructure tools for deploying operating systems out, deploying hardware. I was heavily involved in things like rib boards and DRAC controllers. And if you ever remember Compact Insight Manager, that was another one of the solutions I worked in. And so one of the things I realized that, as I moved out of those roles and I was transitioning into more of a security focus, I realized that should never happen. What access I had was too much privileged access.
Right.
And I needed to get into where I would have the least amount of privileges. And even in my home machines, they're all standard users. So that when I click on something that's requesting some type of installing an application or a browser extension, I know what type of access it's requesting. It's always prompting me for more credentials. And that's for me to make sure that, I don't click on something, or a family member doesn't click on something that could accidentally be ransomware or be a malicious link. So always running that least privilege allows you to make sure you've got more visibility into what elevated requests are happening. And you can get into really, the one that I've used the most example, especially in the metaphors, is most of us have all stayed in hotels. If you've traveled, you've stayed in the hotel, and you go into the hotel. When you get into the reception desk, you'll get a key card, and that key card will go and open up, the elevator, and it might give you access to a specific floor. It'll is, but the problem is that what we end up having is overprivileged. A lot of people will get that hotel card, for example, maintenance staff or the cleaners, and their cards open every single door. They open all the doors and all access. And that's what basically attackers are trying to do, is they might use my key card to get one foot in the door, but they're really after and trying to basically influence those others, the cleaners or the maintenance staff or the hotel workers, to get their elevator, get their keys to the kingdom for their card, and clone and copy those so they can move throughout the network. And that becomes a serious problem for many companies.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you bring up the cleaners, because one of the other aspects of least privilege in my mind is time. So, for example, our cleaning staff has access to our office, but we are able to control when their key card works and when it doesn't, so that we minimize, if somebody were to compromise that card, we don't have to worry about it going on, somebody going in at 2 a.m. And so there's not just the what do you need access to, but for how long and when do you need it. That was it's another aspect of least privilege that I think is sometimes overlooked.
Absolutely. It's all about basically time-based, and it's about security controls. Are you satisfying the security controls before you get access? So it really gets into one of the things I look at. There was a good article that came out. It was actually US CERT and Department of Homeland Security. It was one WannaCry and NotPetya and all of the major ransomwares were creating havoc in the industry, that they came out with this article about best practices, how to mitigate. And within that, it was about controlling local administrator rights. So no one should be local administrator in their systems. And it was also using things like application control to make sure that you're separating kernel level tasks and user context tasks, so that when an application, you can determine basically, is that an application known? And of course, you can look at things like, whether it being integration to virus total, has this file hash ever been seen before?
Right.
So this is really where you combine all of those pieces together. And we have to remember, least privilege, it's not just about, being a local account and a system and doing it these granular elevation controls and time-based on demand and all these verification checks. But it also gets into going into microservices, into web applications, and into SaaS-based applications. So you might look at least privilege from all aspects of connectivity, of applications, of data access, and trying to get down to the granular level, that every time you click on something, every time you open up a menu option or click on a piece of data, is that every of those background checks, it checks, am I authorized and verified to do that? And that gets into is that you might go through, and that's why I talked about earlier about building trust. It's all about trust frameworks and building trust, and saying that if my security control has satisfied me to be at this level of let's say level of trust, then anything at that same level, I don't need to go on and re-authenticate and redo again, unless my risk changes. But if I need to level up the floor and get it into the next level that has more sensitivity, I always prefer to do it in my background in being data centers. You have the data center classification. I like to see us, moving into evolution of risk classification. Is the higher level of risk, the more sensitivity. I might be looking at one record of a patient, if you're a doctor, and that risk is now minimal to that one record. But I'm now looking at the entire database. That's a whole different level of risk. So it should be risk classification, and it should be always about making sure that if you need to level up a privilege or increase the risk, then you need to satisfy more security controls, whether it being multi-factor authentication, VPN access, accessing from a specific machine, time-based, monitoring and recording all my activities and keystrokes, to having my colleague approve me getting access to that database.
Right. Actually, the colleague approval is an interesting one, because we, one of the things that we do with Multifactor is make it such that we actually require two people in order to do some of the really high level administrative things, where one person, sort of my last job, we were able to do this where we put the multi-factor authentication device inside a safe. I didn't have I did have the, the code to the safe, but one of the administrators had the password that was necessary. So the two of us always had to work together and check and balance to make sure that what we're about to do. And that was for the highest, risk systems, and for the stuff with the most potential loss.
Segregation of duties. That's exactly what it is. It's to make sure that one person kind of collude by themselves. And then in the data, when I worked in the data centers, there's cages, we would have a rotation. So 1 month I'd be assigned to cage A, and then next month I'd go to cage B or C, and we kind of, and then there's another team who came behind you and basically audited your work.
Oh, wow.
So and legally, and in your contract, we weren't allowed to mingle socially. To even reduce it down, because of course you're working for banks, you're working for food organizations and telcos, and you're going through, and they want to make sure the reduction. But even to your point, having that dual access workflows or dual authentication, dual requirements, I've seen that heavily used in companies like gaming or gambling machines, where you would have one person who has the key to the door and the other person who has the key to update the software. And no one person has both. I've seen the same concept in ATMs as well. Any types of critical infrastructure, any types of sensitive systems, that 2-key approach type of abuse, to make sure that they're not abusing the authentication and authorization to be given. So, and recording sessions as well does that same effect. If you're doing remote access and your session is being completely recorded, that has that same type of effect.
That was the company I worked at previously. We were doing a lot of recording. Mostly in the beginning, it was about communications and analyzing human behavior and communication behavior, but then we started getting into ingesting endpoint data and other things to look for those. And then one of the things that, I think, again, back to DevSecOps, one of the cool things is that now that so much of the access can be controlled in configuration, we apply good software engineering practices, and now it actually requires 2 or 3 people to approve a pull request to go ahead and grant somebody access to a system. So there's no way, someone can sort of sneak something, and it's pretty, it would be very, very difficult for someone to sort of get access to something without at least 3 other people knowing about it. So
I think absolutely. For me, I think that's one of the crucial things, is that it really prevents people from abusing, because when I was the domain administrator, I was known as the fix-it guy. Right. Happened, I could fix it. But for me to do that, sometimes I was sacrificing security for ease of, getting things up and running quickly. And, we need to, move away from that, is that you can have things work and get up and running quickly, but at the same time, not sacrificing security as a result of that. And I think that's what's important. So hopefully for the audience, hopefully for those listening in, that we're really taking least privilege and zero trust, and all of those things, and made it simplified into some of the metaphors, where like a bank vault, a jewelry store, and one of my favorite uses, of course, is the hotel one, because I can go into that in a lot of detail.
For me, it's actually my family, and whether or not, so I have multiple accounts on every, on our computers, every kid has their own account. And we sort of limit, when they were younger, how much how much access do they need? What apps do they need to run? And, as they've gotten older, we've sort of opened it up more and more so that I'm not constantly going over to the keyboard and giving them access to stuff. And, but it's the same thing. It's like, would you give your kid your ATM card and PIN, if they're 7 and just be like, yeah, cool. Like it's that same thing.
With no limit.
With no, exactly. And no oversight, no anything, right? They just have access to the bank account. Like it's the same thing. Like we do a lot of banking from our computer. So let's make sure that that's segregated off and that people who don't need access to that aspect of what we do, or our taxes or any of those types of things. So
yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's all about, I think many organizations can definitely reduce a lot of risk from doing least privilege, and avoid a lot, but also make it usable. Make it that it's not creating friction. Those security controls can be automated and done in the background. And I think that's really, the direction is to make security usable, make it breathable, make it like a living organism where the fence can increase and decrease as the security threats increase and decrease out there. Make sure your security is adaptive to your business needs.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really important is, again, on the saying yes, is understanding that nobody wants to, there's very few really bad actors, right? So at least insiders, right? So giving someone access to a thing so that they can do their job better or more effectively or more efficiently might just require, again, I think I mentioned at the top, sort of just training and making sure that they understand the implications of what they have. And I find that people will, once they have that, they treat things way more securely, they're conscious of it and it's front of mind, and they sort of are appreciative of, hey, you trust me to do this thing. You've given me access to do this. I can't tell you how many times people come back to me, I've given them, a little bit of admin privilege, and they'll come back to me and they're asking me like, hey, can I do this? Should I do this? They're very careful and they treat the system very precious. And so I think that that's an important part.
Yeah, it's like when you get a company credit card and you spend it like it's your own money.
Actually, I think I spend it way more. I think the company credit card is actually not like my own money, but
what I mean by that is you're a lot more conscious. You take a lot more. It's not like you're spending it like it's someone else's money and you don't really care about the result. Is you actually really treat it and you think about that. What's the consequences? You plan and in your budget. You spend it wisely. Is what I say. But I agree with what you mentioned is the areas about when people know it's all about accountability and responsibility. When people know that they're accountable for it and they're responsible, and that you say what's allowed and what's not allowed, and you're very clear in your policies, then people will follow them.
Exactly.
If your policies are very vague and very kind of unclear, people will basically abuse it and not know they're abusing it. So it's important to make sure that when you're doing your policies at the beginning, that you make it very, very specific and very precise. Otherwise, people don't know that they're actually doing something wrong.
Yeah. Also, I think why is an important part of the policy, making sure that people understand why this is an important thing. I think people tend to take things, understand more if they understand the implications of why I have to do it this way and so on and so forth. So, and making policies really digestible, I think, is an important part as well. I like to we have our official policies that are all, the stuff that we send out to customers, but then the internal one usually is a little more digestible, has some stories, has some funny elements to it, just to sort of help deliver this is why we do the thing. So
that reminds me, I did years ago in one of my former jobs was that it was for a major transportation company. And we were doing this vulnerability assessment. And what ended up happening was that we were rolling out a new IT strategy, and it was very aggressive security to the point where it was really, creating friction with the employees. And we were using very traditional IT methods to deploying policies through email. These very long, it's like a EULA, you're just like, click, yes, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, exactly.
But we actually brought in school children to try and find out what we were doing wrong. And ultimately what they end up showing us is that, this is simple. It's too much text, just make graphics, make an image, storyboard.
Right.
And we end up changing the IT security policy into storyboards. And then we got into getting into, well, we were sending these by email before, and we weren't really getting the traction.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing was that we actually took those storyboards and we actually put them in the bathroom doors, in the back of the doors, in the cubicles.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because the kids were like, yeah, 2 minutes of uninterrupted focus every single day of the week. What more can you ask for? Because email doesn't give you that attention.
Right.
And it was basically, those became 3-month rotation storyboards about, plugging in USB sticks and choosing good password management,
Mm-hmm.
and about, being careful about when you're accessing from public websites and stuff, or public Wi-Fi access points. And it really really made a difference into, one is that it meant that everyone was actually getting attention to it. We're all human. We all need to go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, as well, is that we didn't need to translate it because it was very little text in there. It was all about basically just the graphics. It was going back to the good old comic book of all ages. And it really made me realize about some of the effective ways to communicate. And sometimes, yes, we do have to bring out other experts. And in that case, it was children, were the experts that really changed our ability to communicate better. I think for me, absolutely, is making it digestible, as you mentioned, making it simplified, doing it in small bites,
Yes.
small chunks as well is important, because if you throw a 300, 900 page book at someone, they're going to look at you and go, okay, I'm not going to be able to do my job for a year until I read this. But if you give somebody, a 1 A4 page, graphic storyboard about why they shouldn't do something, or why they should do something in a certain way, that is more consumable. That's more also measurable as well.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, we need to be able to measure these, because if you can't measure, what's the point?
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
So I think at that point, I think we'll end it there, because
I think it's a great place to leave it off. But yeah, I could talk about this type of stuff. I could talk about this all day. So I think it's
absolutely
a great place. I always enjoy speaking with you.
Yeah, for me, who travels a lot and spend a lot of time in hotels, I go through a lot of metaphors from hotel experiences.
There you go. That's why all of my metaphors revolve around me and my family and my kids, because I don't travel that much.
I'm sure you will do some point, but what I want to do in a future show, and I'll leave at some point in time, is funny comical stories from, one is from comical stories from traveling, and also some of those comical things we did in the past, whether, something you've messed up in IT, and something like, the blue screensaver that I've done in the past, which was always hilarious.
Yes.
So
I have some good stories on that one as well.
We'll keep one of those, for the future shows, so people can have a good, bringing the fun back into cybersecurity and making it more positive, and bringing the laughs back. So for the audience, again, many thanks for spending, another episode with us. I hope this was interesting. I hope we've made least privilege much more simplified into what it really means, and what things you can do, and also how important it is to reducing risk, and how important it is to make it also digestible. Stay tuned. Come back, every 2 weeks for more episodes. Hopefully these will be fun and educational. And stay connected. Look for us on social media. Reach out with your comments and questions, and stay safe and have fun.